Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome back to my channel. April is done. It's over and man, the months are really flying by. This wrap up is going to be a little bit different from usual because I'm not just going to talk about the books that I read, but also touch on some other fun bookish stuff that's been going on, including my visit to go and see the stage production of A Little Life and the lovely and unexpected news that my channel has passed 1,000 subscribers in the last few weeks. But first, let's start off with my take on the hot gossip. Well, more like lukewarm gossip at this point. But the Women's Prize shortlist was announced towards the end of April and I did a predictions video and I got it more wrong than I expected. I only managed to guess 3 out of the 6 books that made it, which were Black Butterflies, which I loved, Demon Copperhead, which I haven't read yet, and Fire Rush, which I thought was really worthy, but I didn't enjoy it that much, but I know a lot of other readers have loved it. 2 of the other 3 books were not huge surprises. I very nearly included Trespasses on my own list because I did really enjoy it and I found it to be an engrossing novel. And then I underestimated Maggie O'Farrell yet again with The Marriage Portrait, which I hadn't included even on my long list prediction and left out of my shortlist prediction as well. But she is a heavy hitter and I am not shocked to see her on the list. I am actually a little surprised to see both her and Barbara Kingsolver on the shortlist, as they're both previous winners. They're both the big names in the race, and I thought they'd weed out at least one of them at this stage. And then we come to Pod, and the reactions have been almost meme-worthy. It is the big surprise of the shortlist, and it is the only one to come from outside that pool of about 9 books that were making up most people's predictions. What's funny is that this seemed to be one of the only titles people actively did not want to see on the shortlist, and so I have enjoyed watching people recoil in horror and then be forced to also worry that Demon Copperhead wasn't going to make it because it was the last one announced in the shortlist video. To be honest, I kind of didn't want to read it, but now that it's on the shortlist, I'm going to give it a go, and I'm about halfway through at the moment. I won't say any more about it though, as I have started a reading vlog for both this and Demon Copperhead, which will hopefully be up in the next few weeks, but certainly before the winner is announced. I've got to say, I am absolutely devastated for I'm a Fan, as I think it would have been such a deserving winner. I thought it was such a smart book. And I'm also really disappointed that the Bandit Queens missed out, because it was a massive surprise to me, and I thought those 2 were among the best of the bunch. And for me, they were doing something a little bit different and quite exciting. I feel like what's ended up happening is that the judges have gone for a breadth of themes and topics, and so we've ended up not necessarily with the best books from the long list, but instead a condensed representation of it. So you've got your books about adultery, like Trespasses versus I'm a Fan and Trespasses won. You've got animal protagonists, which would be Glory versus Pod, and Pod came out on top. And then you've got your stories of escape and refuge, which would be Wandering Souls and Black Butterflies, and Black Butterflies is the one that made it onto the shortlist. And then they've rounded it out with the novels that are probably most different from the other ones on the long list. The most lyrical, which is Fire Rush, and the most traditionally historical, which would be The Marriage Portrait. I don't know if I would call this the best possible shortlist that could have come out of a very strong long list, but it does feel like a great year for the Women's Prize. Of the 4 shortlisted titles that I've read, I think I'm flip-flopping between Black Butterflies and Trespasses, but I do fully expect Demon Copperhead to leap to the front of the queue when I've read it. Anyway, we've got a fair while to go actually until the winner is announced, so there's lots of time to read the ones you haven't read. I've got 2 to go, and then we'll all await the winner on the 14th of June. It is a very exciting time, and it really feels like prize season is in full swing. Next up, let's talk about A Little Life. I was very excited and a smidge nervous, but a couple of weeks ago I went to see the stage production of the book, which starred James Norton in the role of Jude. My nervousness was a little bit heightened when, about a week before going, I got an email, unlike any I've ever received ahead of going to a theatre show, which explained that I had to put a sticker on my phone over the camera throughout the performance, and that there would be infrared cameras in the room to detect if anyone was attempting to take a photo of what was going on stage, which I think is because multiple cast members get their wangs out over the course of the show. And this email also warned that there are very realistic depictions of self-harm and suicide, and they are not normally words that I see popping up in my inbox. So yeah, I trotted down on a crisp Friday afternoon to the Harold Pinter Theatre in London, and I sat watching a book I love play out on stage for 3 hours and 40 minutes. And I really enjoyed it. First off, I'm incredibly impressed with how they've managed to condense down what is a really chunky book. It's a 700-page novel into what is actually, when written down on paper, quite a short script. You can buy a copy of it from the theatre's website, and it's got quite a nice cover of the cast. All the main story beats are in there, although they do much more quickly narrow focus onto Jude and strip away focus from, I guess, the other characters. Less so Willem, because he's quite central to Jude's story. It was unsurprisingly very emotionally intense, and the self-harm was very graphic. That is something to be aware of when you go in, but I thought it was handled really well. Like, in the book, to me, in my memory, I think of it as being like little and often always under the surface, but in the play it was much more episodic, so the staging quite cleverly telegraphed when it was about to happen. With some of these projections that were into the wings of the stage, they turned to static and the lighting subtly changes. But yeah, despite all of the warnings, as soon as the first episode of self-harm happened, I noticed a few people get up and leave, which is a real shame, and I wish they'd have known what they were going into. Read your emails, people. The structure of the play, and as a result, like the feeling of it, was also a little different. So in the book, there's a lot of mystery and build up about what's going on with Jude, what his backstory is. But in the play, you get into that quite early, and there are many more crumbs dropped. And so you are much more on the inside with Jude early on, looking out at the other characters. Matt came with me, and he hasn't read the book. And interestingly, he asked me, why does everyone care so much about Jude? Which did make me wonder if that mystery in the book has you more invested in him as a character, because you kind of share the intrigue that all the other characters have with Jude. The performances were all great. Norton and Luke Thompson, who plays Willem, and you might know him from Bridgerton, did fantastically well. And although the actor playing Howard was not really anything like I imagined him when I read the book, some of the scenes between him and Jude were among the most emotionally affecting and really touching. The guy playing JB did a great job, considering how much smaller his role in the play is versus the book. Like, there's that whole chapter sort of in the middle dedicated to JB, which is really just kind of absent. There's like a throwaway line or two that references what's going on in JB's life. And also, the same actor plays Brother Luke, Caleb and Dr. Trailer, which is really clever casting and a really tough gig for that actor, but he did brilliantly with it. It wasn't perfect. I think there is something to be said for how emotionally taxing it is. Although reading the book is an experience that lasts many, many more hours than 3 hours 40, when you're reading and it's too much, you can just put the book down and do something else for a while. But obviously with a theatre show, you can't. Like, can you imagine? Like, sorry guys, can we all just pause for a sec? I really need a breather. Yeah, it's not going to happen, is it? So I kind of feel that it's more relentless as a result, and that they might have done well to cut out a little bit more of what Jude goes through to ease it up. I'm also not really sure they completely stuck the landing and the last 20 minutes or so. The very end has some super odd staging that seems so out of kilter with the rest of the play. I wish they'd just kept it a little bit more simple, to be honest. Overall though, I really, really enjoyed it, and the runtime flew by. It did not feel like nearly 4 hours. And if you are a fan of the book and you are comfortable with blood, I would recommend going to see it. Oh, and I had 2 really fun celebrity encounters. One was that I nearly walked full pelt into Kit Connor, who plays Nick in Netflix's adaptation of Heartstopper. And the other, which I did not realise until the next day, was that Hanya Yanagihara was there, sitting in one of the boxes. And I realised that because she posted on Instagram a picture of the audience on her Instagram story. And if I zoomed in a lot and squinted a little, I could see myself. That was really cool. Okay, on to the books that I read in April, which is probably the reason you're here. Most of my reading this month was for the Women's Prize, and I have already covered my thoughts on these books in quite some detail in my bumper shortlist predictions video, which I will link in the description, but I will give a sort of very brief summary of each of those 5 books for you now. The first of which is The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell, which is a fairly engaging account of the life of Lucrezia de Medici, which I found well plotted. I thought it was better paced than Hamnet, but ultimately I thought it was a bit of a by the numbers, historical, feminist retelling. So yeah, I liked it. I didn't love it. Then we have Homesick by Jennifer Croft. This was a simply written auto-fictional novel about relationships between sisters, Amy and Zoe. It drew a very convincing portrayal of that relationship and Zoe's health problems and how Amy dealt with it. The story doesn't feel particularly substantial, and I suspect the US release of this, where it was billed as a memoir and had a load of photos in it, works much better because Amy talks a lot about the photos that she takes. Well, actually, Amy doesn't talk a lot about the photos that she takes because it's told in the third person, but the photos that she takes with her old school camera are mentioned quite a lot in the book, and I would have loved to have seen them. I think it would have elevated this a little bit. Again, another one I liked, didn't love. Black Butterflies was the third book I read. This is by Priscilla Morris. It is a beautifully written, again quite simply written, but powerful and thought-provoking story about the siege of Sarajevo in the early 90s, as seen through the eyes of the protagonist Zora. Really loved this one, thought it was very emotionally affecting, and all the more so because of what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. Then I read Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo. I did this on audio, and it's about successive dictatorships in a fictional African country called Jadada, populated by anthropomorphic animals. And I know that in itself put some people off or made people think of Animal Farm, but it's nothing like Animal Farm. It's a really polyphonic novel with lots of voices telling stories that are really just thinly veiled accounts of historical reality, mostly from Zimbabwe, in a style that I expect will work for some readers and annoy the hell out of others. There's a lot of repetition, but it is fun. The audiobook is read really well, and I respected this book quite a lot. And then the last Women's Prize book I read was The Bandit Queens, a black comedy by Parini Shroff. This is about a woman named Geeta who lives in a rural Indian village. She lives alone because her husband has disappeared and she is suspected of killing him. And on that basis, she gets drawn into some favours for other women in her community. It covers some serious themes of violence and power with, to be honest, quite impressive and intricate plotting. There's lots of breadcrumbs laid throughout that give clues about what's going to happen later on in the book. And it was also really funny. It was a bit of a welcome breath of fresh air among what was otherwise quite a serious long list. I really liked it. I wasn't going to read it, and I did because people voted for it. And I was so pleasantly surprised, and yeah, gutted it missed out on the shortlist. Because the shortlist announcement was right at the end of the month, I think it was like the 27th of April, it left me very little time to read much else. I did make a start on Heartstopper Volume 3, but I am maybe like just over a third through that, so didn't get to the end of that. That will come next month. And the only non-Women's Prize book that I did manage to finish was This Other Eden by Paul Harding. Harding is a former winner of the Pulitzer Prize for his novel in 2010 called Tinkers, which I don't really know anything about. But this new book is loosely based on real events that happened in the early 1900s when a racially diverse community living on an island called Malaga Island, just off the coast of Maine in the US, were forcibly removed from where they lived. And many of the former residents were put into institutions for the feeble-minded, which is not very nice at all. This real-life tragedy is mentioned in the epigraph of the novel, and so you kind of have this real sense of foreboding from the very first page. In Harding's fictional version, we follow a number of families on Apple Island, named for the apple trees that were planted there, and it's about how a well-meaning but still racist white teacher who visits the island every day to teach the children Latin and Shakespeare, how he sets in motion events that lead to the tragedy that mirrors what happened in the real-life Malaga Island. It's a fairly short novel, and it throws a lot at you in the first 30 or 40 pages, giving this potted history of the community's founding by a guy called Benjamin Honey and his wife Patience, and introduces tons more characters and their stories. And it does all of this in a writing style full of long, winding sentences, chock-a-block with these complex clauses, often very beautiful, admittedly, but also quite mentally taxing. It might just be a me thing, and I think if you're a reader of classics, you'll probably find this a doddle. When the novel settles down into like the present day of the novel, I think it's 1912 or something, I found the reading experience a lot more enjoyable, and we get to know a bit more detail about our main characters. There are a few, but the two main ones for me were Esther Honey, who is Benjamin's great-great-great-granddaughter. Might be too many greats there, but she is a direct descendant of Benjamin and one of the oldest living members of the community. And then Ethan Honey, and he is Esther's grandson, and he's a promising artist with a lot of natural talent. He's like a diamond in the rough, and importantly for the plot, he can pass for white. I think Harding does a really great job with these characters. They felt very real to me. In particular, dialogue between all of the characters was really convincing and often very entertaining. These people have been through a lot, and the community is not perfect. There are health problems because there's been a lot of children produced through incest, and there are secrets and abuse that come to light. I think what Paul Harding does very well here is that he sympathises with the characters, but he doesn't sentimentalise them. And this is clever because it's in stark contrast to how they are treated by the town over on the mainland and the state of Maine, who treat them as like a problem to be dealt with in the name of public health. Medical professionals come over to the island unannounced, and they prod and poke, and they measure the children, they measure their heads and the distance between their eyes and the size of their brows. And ultimately, a decision is made to remove the residents and destroy their homes. The story is a really urgent reminder of how widespread and popular eugenics was in the early 20th century, especially in public policy, and that it wasn't something that just like popped up out of nowhere in 1930s Germany. This was widespread among a lot of Western countries. It was an emotionally impactful novel. I did feel for these characters, as I said, because they felt so real. But overall, I guess I didn't love this novel because I wasn't massively into the writing style. The extremely descriptive sentences, coupled with a fair few plot threads that were purposefully unresolved but left me feeling unsatisfied, meant that I wasn't that desperate to pick it up. But it feels like an important account of a story that I didn't know, and I'm really glad I read it. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is the wonderful surprise that the channel reached over 1,000 subscribers a few weeks ago. There was some craziness that seemed to go off with the YouTube algorithm, and the Big Books video I put out a couple of weeks ago unexpectedly led to a load more subscribers. So thank you to you all, those who have been here from the beginning and also those who are brand new to the channel. It is lovely to have you here. Look at me saying from the very beginning, like I've been doing this for years when it has been just 6 months. Anyway, I did not expect to reach this milestone. I actually kind of expected myself to give up after a few weeks, but I've stuck to it, worked hard to get videos out most weeks, and it's been amazing to have every single one of you on board. I really appreciate your support, your views, your likes, and particularly your comments. Every single one means a lot to me, and I do my best to reply to all of them. All that said, I believe it is a rite of passage to do a 1K Q&A, and so this is a call for questions. I've already had some on the community post I made, but if you didn't see that and there is something you would like to know, let me know in the comments. It can be about books, it can be about how I run the channel, or even something personal, as long as it's not creepy. I will probably do the Q&A next week, so just get your Q's in before then and I will give you some A's. So that's it for April's wrap up. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more videos from me and you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button wherever that happens to be on the page. And until next time, toodles.